Ethel was not the sort of person that I think any man would want to be married to. Listen here. Through the years, Ethel and Andy remained close friends. At his 53rd birthday party at Washington's Jockey Club, she affectionately pushed his face in the cake, which wasn't as bad as the time she poured red wine over his head at a party and stained a priceless Persian carpet. Those just aren't the actions of a woman that I think a man would be, stoked to have on his arm. This little clown who runs around pushing your face in cakes and pouring red wine on your head, where's the respect there? I'm not saying that, you couldn't have fun with Ethel, but I'm telling you that I would not want to have even a friend who would pour red wine on my head and shove my face in cakes, let alone try to be with somebody who did that kind of foolishness and call this person my lover. I think not. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Denise, and today we're going to keep going in the other Mrs. Kennedy, and today is the day that I was telling you about in the last episode. This is when we find out about Ethel and Andy Williams' relationship. Yes, the very same Andy Williams who has been serenading you with Christmas songs these many, many weeks. And this story is really interesting to me because I don't know what's going on with Andy and Ethel after Bobby died. But the greater question to me is what was going on with Andy and Ethel before Bobby died. Weird relationship, you guys. And not even particularly with Andy and Ethel, but with the four of them. Bobby, Claudine, Andy, and Ethel all seem to be quite chummy. And to a marked degree that just leaves my eyebrows going, what y'all doing over there? You know what I'm saying? So let's just go ahead and start reading now. Unfortunately, this book's not going to give us a plethora of details. I don't know that those details are readily available, but I think we can fill in the cracks here, you guys. I don't know if Ethel was being the good little Catholic girl in this scenario, but maybe she was. However, I do not trust Bobby at all. And I'm sure that Bobby and Claudine had something going on, but I don't know if Ethel was just happy to tag along, if she felt like the whole thing made her kind of hip. I don't know. I'm getting ahead of myself. You guys, tell me what's going on here. Maybe you guys can help me translate, because some of the stuff, I'm like, these inside jokes are weird, but I don't really get them. And I don't know what y'all are talking about. But maybe you guys can help me patch together some kind of story that makes sense. Right now, I'm like, Ethel Kennedy. Okay, this chapter is called Ethel and Andy, and it begins by saying that with her perks slashed dramatically, and with the ongoing responsibility of 11 children, Ethel's future was looking less than bright. She needed a husband, members of her inner circle felt, and they had started suggesting she follow her sister-in-law Jackie's example and find a rich one. We hinted to her that she needed someone to make her life comfortable again, her pal said. Ethel's response was, we'll see. Early bets were being wagered on genial Andy Williams, whom Ethel had known since the mid-60s, when Bobby invited the singer and his pretty Paris-born actress wife, Claudine Longet, into their group of celebrity pals. Williams, who had become one of Ethel's favorites at Hickory Hill and Hyannisport, had initially failed to see the value of befriending the Kennedys, according to his friend, TV producer Pierre Cassette. I was playing golf with Andy one day at the height of his television years, Cassette recalled, and he says, I just got a call from Ethel and Bobby Kennedy. And they want me to go down to Palm Springs. I have a lot of work to do, and I don't want to go down there, and they just keep calling. For Pierre Cassette, the conversation was déjà vu. A few years earlier, his friend Peter Lawford had asked him for a favor. Could Cassette, then a talent manager, convince his client, popular singer Vic Damon, to fly up to Fresno and help campaign for Jack Kennedy? Damon's response was, Fresno? This time around, Cassette knew better. You should pay attention to their call, because that's how Bob Hope and Bing Crosby stayed stars for 100 years, he advised the singer. They developed all these outside relationships that were not just show business. This is very, very key to your career and success. Bing has all kinds of friends in politics, and so does Bob. And that just spreads out and boomerangs through all the media. So if Bobby and Ethel are calling you, don't be a schmuck, Cassette continued. Andy said, You really think so? I said, I'm positive. So he got in his golf cart and he went down to the snack bar and called them. He came back and said, okay, we're going to go. When he came back from Palm Springs, he said, I love that Bobby and I love that Ethel. We spent 4 great days together. So that was the beginning of that involvement. The relationship between the Kennedys and the Williamses blossomed quickly. The two handsome couples skied together at Sun Valley and Aspen, sailed off of Cape Cod, shot the rapids on the Colorado River, and cruised the Caribbean. Claudine and Andy even named the last of their 3 children after Bobby. You guys, I would have to be pretty dang close to someone to name 3 of my kids after them. This person called you up and was like, you want to hang out? And you said yes. And then you decided to name 3 of your kids after this guy? What is the deal? There's nobody in my life that I would be like, kid number 1, kid number 2, kid number 3, all being named after this person. No relation to you, just somebody who let you get on their boat. What is happening with that? The couples had grown so close that some insiders began to suspect that a flirtation, possibly even more, had developed between Bobby and Claudine by the time that Bobby had become a senator. See, that I can believe. Peter Lawford, the clan sex guru, actually told confidants that Bobby had a brief, rather intense affair with Claudine, who was 15 years his junior during that time. Lawford's last wife, Patricia Seton Lawford, had heard about the affair from her husband. Peter was definite that Bobby and Claudine had had an affair. Peter had probably heard it through some very reliable source who was present. I don't think Bobby would have picked up the phone and said, "Hey, guess what, Peter? I slept with Claudine Longier last night." Peter and Jack were more suited to each other. Peter's relationship with Bobby was more tense. But whatever was going on, it was not typical. I mean, you guys, I challenge you to think of any couple in your life that you would dedicate so much personal time to and display the intensity of your friendship so inexplicably throughout your house. Because the book goes on to say that the closeness of the relationship between the 2 couples was indeed intense, underscored not only by their frequent visits and trips, but also by the enormous amount of Bobby and Ethel memorabilia that Andy and Claudine kept in their Beverly Hills mansion. Walls and tabletops were covered with silver-framed photos of the 2 couples together, or of Bobby and Ethel separately. Gold-tooled leather albums filled with snapshots of their shared trips and vacations were piled high on cocktail tables. When the Williamses separated after Bobby's death, Claudine left behind many photographs that had been signed by Ethel to Andy. Interestingly, the one picture Claudine took with her and treasured the most was of Bobby holding an umbrella in the rain, and the inscription read, "If ever you need to share a raincoat, ... What? If my husband gave some girl a picture of him holding an umbrella and the inscription read, "If ever you need to share a raincoat," I'd have handed him that raincoat and showed him the door. But apparently, giving each other photographs with inexplicable inscriptions kind of was the norm in this little fun loving foursome. Because Andy also had a picture, but I'm going to need some help figuring this one out. Because I don't understand what they wrote on this picture. But it doesn't make me feel good. It makes me feel like something's going on. The book says that Andy had a special photograph too. It was of Ethel, Bobby, and their children, and he kept it in his private office. "This is what you get, Andy, with Ethel," Bobby had written in one corner. And in another part of the photo, Ethel had added her own comment. She'd drawn a heart pierced by Cupid's arrow. And she had written the words, "That's okay, Andy. I think you'd make a great dad." What? What does any of this mean? Why do you have a picture of yourself, your husband, and your 11 children? I suppose 10 at the time. And both of you guys are kidding around about "this is what you get with Ethel." "That's okay, Andy. I think you would have made a great dad." What are the kids being dragged into this for? What are y'all talking about? I mean, what is happening? Is there some kind of joke about her fertility? Is there some kind of innuendo about... I don't understand. I don't get what's going on. But I feel like these inside jokes are not funny to me. Maybe there's some kind of veil over my eyes because humor changes as the decades go by. I don't know. Do you guys understand? Is there a theme here that I'm missing out on? Is there a joke that I'm not privy to? Is there some... I don't get this, and I don't understand why this is what you would keep. Of all the things, as you and your wife sort of break up houses, you're separated, and you're gathering your things and she's gathering hers. And you're like, can't forget that picture of Bobby, Ethel, and all their kids, and, the jokes about how this is what I get with Ethel, and, I could be a good dad too. Like, can't forget that. I feel like that'd be the first thing I'd throw away. Well, Claudine doesn't really have any help for us because asked about it, she said, "Well, it's the sort of thing that we were always sending to each other. It was a game, an inside hip sort of game." It's an inside hip kind of game, you guys. That's why you're never going to get it, because you're not inside and you're not hip. But she did acknowledge that she had a very special relationship with Bobby, though not so much with Ethel. Claudine said that when it came to she and Bobby, we could talk in the way a girl and a man can talk, the way women are almost never able to talk, the way I was never able to talk to Ethel. Not chit-chat, she said. When Bobby died, I lost interest in the Kennedys. There was no one there for me to talk to. I drifted away. There was just no one there. Kennedy friends remembered that Bobby had been very attracted to Claudine, a pretty Parisian who was petite and wiry like Ethel and whose sharp, angular face had an almost Kennedy cast. An aspiring actress, Claudine had come to the United States after several theatrical appearances in Paris and Rome, the same year that Jack had won the presidency. In December 1961, Andy, who was at the time 31, married 19-year-old Claudine. 19 to his 31. So as you can see, things started out a little questionable. But a huge success at this point, Andy was instrumental in helping his young bride's career get off the ground, playing sex kitten roles on such TV programs as Kraft Theater, Dr. Kildare, Combat, and Rat Patrol. She also made a couple of films, most notably The Party, a zany beatnik farce with Peter Sellers. But none of her roles garnered much critical acclaim. Imagine that. It wasn't until 1977, 2 years after her divorce from Andy, that she received worldwide attention for a real-life melodrama. She was convicted of criminally negligent homicide in the shooting of her lover, Vladimir Spider Savic, a professional ski racer, at his home near Aspen. Claudine testified that the gun had fired accidentally, a claim that was famously parodied in a Saturday Night Live skit. Friends recalled how Ethel had always grown dreamy-eyed whenever she heard Andy sing Canadian Sunset and The Village of St. Bernadette, two of his big hits from the 50s. Andy offered the kind of clean-cut, all-American, lowbrow entertainment Ethel favored, a mutual friend said later. It was Ethel who had coerced Bobby into calling Andy in the first place and bringing him into their circle. After they became close friends, Ethel often commented on how much Andy reminded her of Bobby. Both were short, slight, and somewhat rugged-looking. Both had toothy grins and dimples. There were odd similarities in Ethel's and Andy's backgrounds, too, which they both felt connected them. Like George Skakel Sr., Jay Williams, Andy's father, had started out as a railroad man, a mail clerk. And, like Ethel's father, he, too, had an entrepreneurial spirit. An amateur musician, he had trained his pretty daughter and 4 good-looking sons, Andy, born in 1930, was the youngest, to sing, hoping to get them into show business. He first booked them as a family choir into the Presbyterian church in their hometown of Wall Lake, Iowa. After that, things moved quickly. By the early 50s, while Ethel was learning to be a Kennedy wife and Bobby was slogging through his law books, Andy, already known for his smooth delivery of love ballads and his relaxed and casual manner, had made his way to New York, where he scored a big recording contract, a regular spot on The Steve Allen Show, and finally his own long-running Emmy Award-winning variety show on NBC. Over the years, Andy had become a very wealthy man. At the height of his career, he was the country's best-selling male vocalist and had managed to amass an enormous art collection. His art was one of the interests he shared with Ethel, along with tennis and dogs. Rich, handsome, powerful, and as comfortable as an old shoe, Andy seemed a perfect marriage prospect for Ethel. Even his estranged wife Claudine agreed on that when Ethel and Andy were first linked romantically in the press in the early 70s. "If Ethel and Andy should get married, it would not make me unhappy," Claudine said. "It would be a great thing for America. I mean, having her marry such a wholesome, boy-next-door type." Not long after Bobby died, Ethel made Andy's rendition of Battle Hymn of the Republic the #1 song on her home jukebox. And, mysteriously, she ordered a member of her household staff to buy up every Andy Williams record that he could find on the Cape. Why do you need that many copies of the record? This is like lovesick teenager behavior, just playing the same song over and over and over again and like going out and buying all the records. This is not the behavior of a person of her age and status. As early as the fall of 1970, Ethel's relationship with Andy showed signs of becoming seriously romantic. When he hosted a Thanksgiving TV special at Washington's Ford Theater, Ethel sat in the audience with her pal David Brinkley, her escort for the evening. But members of the audience noticed that Ethel only had eyes for Andy, and when he sang the word love, observers agreed he looked straight at Ethel with a meaningful smile. A couple of months later, with Andy at her side, Ethel showed up in a sexy white hot pants jumpsuit under a see-through skirt for a benefit at the new Kennedy Center in Washington. Photos taken of the two suggested nothing more than platonic friendship, but the Washington Post's Maxine Cheshire, writing for the Ladies' Home Journal, reported, Ethel and Andy held hands under the table and sipped champagne from a single shared glass. Now what could that mean? Later, Andy and Ethel were spotted being openly affectionate. When someone asked Andy whether he thought they'd get married, he said, "We just might, but first I'd have to work a few things out." Yeah, like the fact that she's got 11 kids that would now be your responsibility. A deluge of items began appearing in gossip columns. Ethel spotted in the audience at a taping of Andy's show in Los Angeles. Ethel and Andy together at ringside for the Ollie Frazier fight at Madison Square Garden. In the summer of 1971, reports of an Ethel-Andy marriage began appearing. The Lakes Region Trader, a little paper in Laconia, New Hampshire, quoted reliable sources as saying that the two would tie the knot on a New Hampshire mountain over Labor Day, and that a champagne party was being organized at the Watervale Valley Resort, owned by Kennedy clan pal Tom Corcoran. A journalist trying to promote a Kennedy book was, quote, telling pals that he believes Ethel and Andy will make an announcement any day. The pulp magazines also got into the act. The headline on the cover of the June 1971 issue of Screenland screamed, "Martha Mitchell tells us Ethel Kennedy and Andy Williams to wed." Martha Mitchell, wife of Richard Nixon's Attorney General, subsequently expressed shock that she'd been quoted by the magazine. "What in the world do I know about Ethel Kennedy?" she gasped when asked for comment. "I've never even heard this discussed, and I have never met Andy Williams in my life." Mrs. Mitchell also sent a note to Ethel explaining that she had never said anything of the kind. Ethel thanked Martha for replying to the story and sent along another clip that declared, "Cary Grant lifts the lid on his romance with Ethel Kennedy." Ethel's purported hunt for a potential husband had become a zany romp. The media was having a field day, and so was Ethel. She loved all this attention. She really did. I mean, Merry Widow is exactly what Ethel Kennedy was. She, I'm sure, did miss Bobby. I'm sure she missed having somebody to help her with this brood that she's got. And, her life had revolved around him. But her being linked to all these men was kind of an exciting thing for her. The book says that she thought it was all a riot, recalled George Terrian. She loved the attention she was getting. She loved the fact that she was suddenly considered a femme fatale. Meanwhile, Andy played along, raving to his friends that Ethel was a great gal, so much fun, that they'd had so much in common, and that she was a marvelous catch. Claudine, though, didn't buy it. "Andy and I see so much of each other," she said at the time. "I kid him about what the fan magazines write. I say, I read that you are going to marry Ethel. He says, yeah, and you wouldn't believe the people who talk to me now that never talked to me before." Claudine felt Andy was enjoying all the publicity and all those glamorous dinners. The bottom line was that she didn't see marriage in their future. "Not unless I have become insensitive to what my husband is thinking and feeling, and I know I have not." Ethel and Andy, she believed, were not quite as well suited as many thought either. "Ethel is so strong, so sportive," she said, "and Andy has no taste for sports. He isn't coordinated. He's brilliant and creative, but he's not athletic. He's scared to death of water, and he's no good at skiing." I'm with Claudine. I don't see really how this match could be made. I mean, if he's not athletic, I don't see him and Ethel ever managing. Observed a friend of Andy's years later. He was always quite an operator, and Andy has always come first with Andy. The publicity value in whatever was going on between him and Ethel was enormous. Great for the career. Parade magazine touched on exactly that point in its popular celebrity question and answer section on Sunday, August 29th, 1971. Mrs. Robert F. Kennedy has no press agent, nor does her involved, ebullient lifestyle need one. However, ever since the beginning of the singer's idolatrous friendship with the Kennedys, Andy's relationship with Robert and Ethel has always landed him in the news. If Andy makes a, quote, secret visit to Hyannisport, it suddenly turns out to be not so secret. Ethel Kennedy is already heralded as a visitor to Andy's Las Vegas opening, though it hasn't happened yet. No one ever said that Williams isn't his own best press agent. For months, Pierre Cassette had been reading the gossip items and hearing Andy's boasts about his relationship with Ethel. Having advised the singer more than a decade earlier to ingratiate himself with the Kennedys, Cassette was now finally about to meet the reputed woman of Andy's dreams. And this story has to be my favorite of the whole chapter. Cassette is excellent because he does not mince words. And the way he tells the story is rich. He says that one day, in the midst of that hullabaloo about the two of them, Andy says to me, "Come on, I want you to come to Washington with me and meet her," Cassette recalled. Andy said, Ethel's going to pick us up at the airport, and we're going to stay at Hickory Hill. We're going to play tennis and swim and eat. I said, okay. At this point, I was kind of anxious to meet her. As a show business guy, I knew all the show folks, but I didn't know very much about the political life. I had this image of the limousines and all that stature. But we get to the airport, and I'm looking around, and this old beat-up station wagon with a kid sticking out of it and an old dog yapping pulls up, and I hear this voice, Andy! Andy! And I say, Andy, who the F is that? He said, that's Ethel. I said, that's Ethel Kennedy? I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. She looked like anything in the world other than Ethel Kennedy. I was absolutely stunned. Andy had been married to Claudine, a real beauty. And here's this chick who looked like Raggedy Ann. I was dumbfounded, and Andy was laughing. He said, well, that's Ethel. And that remained Ethel for the 20 years I knew her. Cosette, though, who would have some interesting adventures with Ethel through the years, did see almost instantly how she could be attractive to a man. She had enormous enthusiasm. The energy that came from her was huge. She was genuinely inquisitive, but asked simple questions that were kind of unsophisticated for a woman of her stature. She had an absolutely, completely simplistic approach to everything. She'd look at you with these eyes and ask questions like a kid in 7th grade. Oh, gee, I didn't know that. Once, when Cosette was visiting Ethel at Hyannisport, he mentioned in passing that his friend, the singer John Rayett, Bonnie Rayet's father, was appearing at the local theater in the round. Ethel was thrilled, bubbling over, jumping up and down like a kid. Oh, John Rayett! I love John Rayett! You know John? We must go see John Rayett! That night, Ethel began coaxing Cosette to call Rayett for a get-together. Let's take him out sailing on the Resolute, she suggested. I said, no, Ethel, he's going to do a show tonight. And she said, bring him out! Come on! Come on! That night after the show, Cosette telephoned Rayett at his hotel and extended Ethel's invitation. John, tomorrow we're going out with Ethel Kennedy. We're going to take a ride on her boat. Rayett was less than enthusiastic. He explained that he shouldn't be doing a lot of running around and he needed to protect his voice for the show. We're talking Ethel Kennedy, Cosette reiterated firmly. John Rayett relented. The next day, John shows up, and he's expecting this 300-foot Kennedy-style yacht, and she's got the Resolute, this little BS 16-foot boat that's got holes and 14 kids in it. Cosette chuckled. So we get in this boat with the 14 kids and the 65 sandwiches and the 2 dogs and could barely keep afloat. I know John very well, and the one thing he does not like to do is perform without an orchestra, without lights, without a sound system. So Ethel says, children, wait till you hear this. Wait till you hear this, children. Mommy was there opening night at Carousel, and John sang, do that one, John. Oh, you know, My Boy Bill. Now, John, how's that go? Oh, come on, do it, do it. Listen, children, listen. At this point, John is absolutely staring knives at me. He couldn't believe what was happening. Ethel's saying, now you must do this for the children. He's in his boat, and he's now singing My Boy Bill. And when he's finished, Ethel says, what's that thing you did from Pajama Game? Listen to this one, kids. You'll know this one. And he's standing in this boat, and she's now got him doing his entire repertoire. And to my absolute amazement, John's getting into it. Ethel said, isn't he wonderful, children? And the kids couldn't have effing cared less. They wanted to hear little Simon and Garfunkel. When we got back to the house, I said, Ethel, I have never in my experience seen anything like that. You'd make the greatest producer in the history of show business. Ethel loved being around the show business people. She was very entranced by their accomplishments. And they were drawn to her, too, because they knew that they were really appreciated as artists. She had all the attributes of a celebrity, and she was also just like the lady next door. She was either in a dirty old pair of Levi's with part of her ass showing, or she was in some kind of gown that she'd put together 3 seconds before she had to go on. She's a very unusual woman. But she did not seem to be a woman in love, at least as far as Cosette could see. Cosette found no indication that the relationship between Ethel and Andy was anything other than platonic. We used to hang out, and we had a lot of fun and so on, but Andy never talked to me about a romance with Ethel Kennedy. I'd tease him about it. Well, why don't you marry Ethel? You'd be the king of Washington, and he'd just laugh. Andy himself once said, take quite a man to marry Ethel. They didn't have that kind of relationship, Cosette said. It wasn't close. After Andy divorced Claudine, he had 2 great girls that he lived with for long periods of time. One was a therapist in a hospital and an interior decorator, and the other one worked in Andy's company. But I don't think it's a great mystery why it didn't work out with Ethel and Andy, because Ethel was not the sort of person that I think any man would want to be married to. Listen here. Through the years, Ethel and Andy remained close friends. At his 53rd birthday party at Washington's Jockey Club, she affectionately pushed his face in the cake, which wasn't as bad as the time she poured red wine over his head at a party and stained a priceless Persian carpet. Those just aren't the actions of a woman that I think a man would be, stoked to have on his arm. This little clown who runs around pushing your face in cakes and pouring red wine on your head, where's the respect there? I'm not saying that, you couldn't have fun with Ethel, but I'm telling you that I would not want to have even a friend who would pour red wine on my head and shove my face in cakes, let alone try to be with somebody who did that kind of foolishness and call this person my lover. I think not. 16 years after his divorce from Claudine, Williams, 60, married a pretty Aspen hotel hostess who was 25 years his junior. Claudine also remarried. After serving her jail term for shooting the skier, she tied the knot with her defense attorney. So that is the direction that the foursome eventually went. How odd and strange. The next chapter is very short, so I'm going to try to fit it in on this episode. It's entitled Dating Game, and it goes along well with the chapter we just read. This is chapter 100, and it begins by saying that through the 70s and 80s, a number of prominent men were linked to Ethel, such as Look magazine's Warren Rogers. Like Andy, he was an old friend of Ethel and Bobby's. According to members of Ethel's circle, Rogers had been dating Anne Brinkley, ex-wife of NBC's David Brinkley, until Ethel had stolen Rogers away from her. One of those Anne Brinkley had confided in was Coates Redman, who handled organization and press for the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Awards, and was constantly having nasty run-ins with Ethel. I suppose the reason Anne talked to me about what happened with Warren was because I was having my own personal hard time with Ethel at the time. Anne had an antique store in Georgetown, and I was in there one day, and she told me totally gratuitously, and in a rueful way, that Ethel had stolen Warren. Anne considered Ethel an absolute rat. Another friend said that Warren was attractive. Anne thought that she had a corner on him, and Ethel threw herself at him. Speculation about a romance between Ethel and Rogers began in the spring of 1970, when the two showed up together at the Shorman Hotel's Blue Room to hear singer Jack Jones. Weight-conscious women in the Blue Room enviously eyed Mrs. Kennedy, the mother of 11 children, as she danced cozily with Rogers, wrote Washington Star Society reporter Gwen Dobson. She wore a form-fitting pale pink dress. Romantic speculation was rife among observers who know Rogers was widowed about a year ago. 18 months later, Ethel was photographed standing with Rogers smiling proudly at his inauguration as president of the National Press Club. Rumors also flew that Ethel was romantically involved with New York attorney William Vandal Hoovel, a longtime aide of Bobby's. At the time, Vanden Heuvel, a Catholic, was separated from his wife. Friends of Ethel's tried to promote the romance with the press, telling the Washington Post's Maxine Cheshire that Vanden Heuvel is being mentioned more and more frequently as a suitor with serious intentions about Ethel Kennedy. Cheshire quoted one intimate of Ethel's as saying, "He makes a wonderful substitute father for Ethel's children. He's in a position to devote himself to helping her bring them up the way she wants." Cheshire wrote that a friend of Vanden Heuvel had telephoned him to ask about the rumors, and he replied, "It would be the most wonderful thing in my life. Why don't you call and ask her? If she says yes, call me back." Everyone jumped on the story, even after Vanden Heuvel denied the Washington Post account that he and Ethel actually were considering marriage. Once again, Screenland was on the spot with, quote, exclusive photos that the magazine claimed were of Ethel and Vanden Heuvel attending a charity ball in New York. Of course, the man turned out to be Lem Billings, but Hollywood gossip columnist Dorothy Manners quoted a close friend of Ethel's as saying of the Vanden Heuvel speculation, "Ethel is an old-fashioned Catholic. She's never gone along with the innovations within the church, so it would be a terrible wrench in her devoted beliefs to marry a man whose wife is still living even though Vanden Heuvel is himself a Catholic. I don't see marriage there myself." Names of other purported suitors: New York Governor Hugh Carey, Los Angeles businessman Don Klosterman, ABC News and Sports executive Roone Arledge, Norton Simon president David Mahoney, sportscaster Frank Gifford, continue to surface, making Ethel seem like the world's most sought-after married widow. Like many of her other suitors, Gifford had been a friend of both Bobby and Ethel's, having gotten to know them when Bobby was Attorney General, even though Gifford had been an avid supporter of Richard Nixon in the 1960 campaign. One afternoon at Hyannisport, sailing aboard the Resolute with Ethel at the helm, he saw how crazy she could be. Ethel and Eunice had been playing a game of chicken in their respective boats, heading straight at one another. I took one look at the set of Ethel's jaw and thought, oh my goodness, she's not going to back off. I know nothing about sailing, but something told me no rule of sea would come into play here, Gifford recalled. At the last minute, Eunice swerved. Ethel didn't even blink. Had both of them been alone on those boats, I suspect that would have been the end of the boats. Not long after, Eunice got her revenge. Ethel, Gifford, and others were having cocktails when Eunice came through the French doors with a garden hose and soaked Ethel and everyone present. No one laughed harder than a thoroughly drenched Ethel, said Gifford. See, those shenanigans just don't sound fun to me. I don't want to go to somebody's house and be soaked by a garden hose because two people were playing chicken in their boats and the person who lost wanted to get back the person who won. And so I don't even care if it's all in good fun. I left that kind of fun, back in second grade. I don't want to get drenched with the garden hose inside a house while I'm trying to have a cocktail. Gifford had become a frequent dinner guest at Hickory Hill in the mid to late 70s, and Ethel's pals were putting out the word. If he wasn't married, she'd grab him in a minute. Gifford was in the process of getting a divorce from his wife Maxine, who had multiple sclerosis. Like Anne Brinkley, she had once been close to Ethel, but that was before Frank and Maxine split. Mrs. Kennedy was crazy about Frank, recalled Noelle Fell. Oh, our old friend Noelle's back. Big time, teenager crazy. When she knew he was coming for dinner, she'd giggle. She couldn't stand it. Oh, God, she'd say, and go make herself up. All the members of the staff would say, Frank Gifford's coming. She'll be in a good mood now. Mrs. Kennedy would look the best she could for him. In the years I worked for her, I would have said that he would be her pick, even though I believe it was all one-sided. At a dinner party at Hickory Hill, recalled a friend from college, Ethel let everyone know how she felt about Gifford. She set up a table for just the two of them. It was very private, and she never gave it a thought how it would look to everyone else who was present. By the late 70s, Ethel and Frank began appearing together in public, dining and dancing at Georgetown bistros. Well, nothing ever came of Ethel's friendship with Gifford. Her son Michael married Gifford's daughter Victoria in 1981. The two met in 1974 when Victoria worked as an intern in Ted Kennedy's office while staying at Hickory Hill. For a time, there was talk that Ethel might become the First Lady of New York. Hugh Carey seemed to have dropped his longtime date, Anne Ford Uzieli, in favor of Ethel. She and Carey had started seeing a lot of each other and were, for a time, spending every weekend together. Friends were saying the governor was soundly smitten. Ethel is really incredible, Carey told a friend. Ethel thrived on compliments from her male friends, and they were quick to oblige her. She liked to feel how pretty she looked and what a good athlete she was, Fell said. They knew that's what she expected, and she just loved attention from the men. On one occasion, Ethel arrived unexpectedly at the Kennedys' oceanfront estate in Palm Beach with a man, infuriating Rose, who had been staying at the house at the time. Mrs. Kennedy made her leave because she didn't like the idea of her having a boyfriend by the pool, recalled Secretary Barbara Gibson. Ethel and the man were openly showing affection, and Mrs. Kennedy disapproved. I think Mrs. Kennedy kind of needs to wake up. I mean, Ethel is not old, and she probably does want to get married again, but it is a little tasteless to bring your boyfriend to your mother-in-law's house. She has lost her son to an assassination, and although she knows that you will eventually have to move on, do you need to rub it in her face? I think both parties needed to kind of wake up a little there. But do you guys remember how I told you in a previous episode that Ethel liked to send out these weird little cards in the mail, none of which ever seems to make any sense to me? Her idea, I hear about people sending out Christmas cards and Valentines when you're elementary school are handed out, but Ethel would send out a Valentine's Day card each year, and it was always some kind of corny, hokey foolishness. The book says that another time, Ethel had mailed out Valentine's Day cards with a photo of her sitting on Rosie Greer's lap and the words, "Won't you be my Valentine?" Somehow one of the cards got in the hands of Rose. Mrs. Kennedy had a fit, said Barbara Gibson. She wrote to Ethel saying, "I don't think it's wise to spend the Kennedy money on things like this." Ethel loved being around men. She had started playing doubles once a week at indoor courts in McLean, just her and 3 fellows. "Women's tennis bores the tears out of me," she said. Ethel was the only woman on the board of the RFK Foundation. She let it be known that she found most women uninteresting and unintelligent, and scoffed at the growing feminist movement. "I just think we've lost what should be the main emphasis on motherhood and being good wives. People seem ashamed of it," she said. "Well, Ethel, you only say that you're interested in it. Yeah, you have a whole team of kids back at the house, but when were you ever really concerned with being a mother? You bore the children and left them in the hands of nannies. You're out every night dancing, drinking, partying, but you really care about being a mom and really taking care of those kids. Everybody else has lost the plot. You are the singular person who still understands the importance of motherhood, and yet you've never done the job a day in your life." Ethel had begun to advertise openly that she was available, though most of her efforts seemed in jest. Yes, but many a truth is spoken in jest. At one point, she started wearing a bunch of tiny gold keys on a slender gold necklace ring. When she was asked what the keys unlocked, she responded, "Love." but she didn't say whose. One year, this is wild. One year she had a giant poster designed that superimposed pictures of herself and all her children against a Mother Goose drawing, and then sent it to interested men with the following poem. There was an old lady who lived in a shoe. She had so many children she didn't know what to do. She'd marry anybody, even you. Can you imagine getting this giant poster of Ethel Kennedy and her 11,065,000 children? It's like, geez, Ethel, way to scare away the maybe one guy on the planet who was willing to put up with you. You send out this scary, freaky stuff? During the height of her frenzied dating period, Ethel devoted an enormous amount of time preparing for the man's arrival, sometimes hours, according to Noel Fell, who helped dress her. In an effort to make herself more appealing, Ethel would wear his favorite color. Under her slinky dresses, she'd started wearing either padded bras, which she bought a dozen at a time from Saks Fifth Avenue, or special push-ups to support her small breasts and make them appear larger. She'd also begun waxing portions of her body to get rid of body hair. Her arms and legs were real hairy, and she had facial hair, Fell said. She'd go into her bathroom, lock the door, warm up the wax, and apply it. You could hear her in there yelling, "Ouch! Ouch!" as she stripped it off because it hurt like hell. She'd do that when she was expecting a man she really wanted to impress, usually on a weekly basis. In the end, despite all appearances to the contrary, Ethel never had any real intention of remarrying. She would always have one excuse or another for friends when a prospective candidate's name is brought up. "Oh, he's not Catholic," she'd groan. Or, "He's divorced and I can't marry him." She once joked to Frank Mankiewicz, "You know what'll happen, I just know it. In 1990, the Catholic Church will say it's perfectly all right for a Catholic to marry a divorced person. And worse, they'll say it was the right thing to do all along, and there I'll be, too late." Mankiewicz said later, "Whenever I see someone linked with her on the cover of one of those magazines I sell in grocery stores, I call her and kid her about it." It had all been somewhat of a game. Ethel had always known that she would dedicate her life to Bobby's memory. She talked to him constantly, and she never removed her wedding rings. At a hockey match to benefit retarded children in Madison Square Garden in 1974, 6 years after Bobby's death, Ethel shook hands with a blind child. When he asked her whether she was Rose Kennedy, Ethel answered, "No, I'm Ethel, Bobby's wife." I don't really think that that's so weird, because that is who she was in conjunction with the family. She was Bobby's wife. Now, she didn't use past tense, as in, I was Bobby's wife, so I guess that's why some people thought that was odd. I don't find that odd, but I do find some of these other examples strange. The book says that we'd be in a car looking for a parking spot, said a confidant, and Ethel would say, "Don't worry, Bobby will direct me to one." She talked to him just as though he was right there. In a restaurant, she'd say, "Bobby, what should I order?" And to the children, she'd say, "Your father won't like this. He'll be mad." In discussions with friends, she'd say, "This senator would never agree to this." It was eerie and it was quite sad. Ethel had become so obsessed with the correctness of a painting of Bobby that she went through 2 artists before she finally unveiled the final version at the Justice Department in March 1975. It was a boyish portrait of Bobby, hair windblown, hands stuffed in the pockets of rumpled khaki pants. It was a painting that she felt showed his compassion, significance, and concern, and that really caught Bobby's spirit. Friends said that they would be shocked if Ethel ever had a physical relationship with a man after Bobby's death. Ethel's brother Jim Skakel said, "We nicknamed her the Virgin of McLean." Ethel had turned both Hickory Hill and her home in the compound into shrines to Bobby. There wasn't a room in either house that didn't have photographs of Bobby plastered to the walls or spilling over tabletops. There were literally hundreds of them. Inside her closets were life-size photos of Bobby that often frightened guests who happened to open one of them unawares. That's weird. Why are there life-size copies of Bobby's picture in the closets? Attending a party at Hickory Hill, Barbara Hauer had somehow wandered upstairs and into Ethel's dressing room and bathroom. Oh, somehow she wandered up there, did she? That's a little bit intrusive. Well, she claims that there were pictures of Bobby. She also had a tape that David Brinkley had put together for her of love songs from the 50s that she and Bobby must have liked. The label on the tape said, "For Ethel to Take a Bath by," from David Brinkley. I don't think David Brinkley needs to be thinking about Ethel in the bathtub while she thinks about Bobby. From her tub, she could listen to music and see all the photos. That bathroom was like a shrine. Ethel had become the keeper of the flame, to keep the legend intact, and the legend was falling apart. But she believed Bobby and the Kennedys were special and different, and she wanted to keep the lamp lit. As one member of Ethel's circle said, the ghost of Bobby haunted Hickory Hill. How in the world any man ever thought that they could win her and compete with Bobby Kennedy's spirit, I'll never know. George Terrian agreed. The whole Skakel family hoped she'd find someone and get married, but deep down we knew that she never would. The Kennedy name meant too much to her. She sacrificed a lot in those years, but that's one thing she'd cling to until the day she died. Well, that's the end of that. The next chapter is entitled Anger and Fury, which is exactly what you think it's going to be about. Ethel. All right, what did you guys think about that? I don't think any of us are surprised to find that she just kind of dated for fun, but she wasn't serious, because I think that that's kind of the way Ethel was. She did a lot of things for fun, but wasn't serious. And I think the idea of her replacing Bobby with any other man would have felt almost sacrilegious to her. She had devoted her life to Bobby, and then to bring some other man into her bed and into her home and into her heart, I think would have been to transgress against her very nature. So I think she had fun sort of flirting around with the idea and playing and like getting compliments and everything, because who doesn't like that? But I don't think that there's any possibility that anybody who really knew her ever thought she would get married again. And I think the guys who dated her, I mean, I think Andy Williams did it for the publicity. But I think the other guys dated her because she was a famous wife of a famous person, and it gave them some clout, or at least was an experience that they could have. But I don't know how many people want to marry a woman who's got 11 uncontrollable children. I think that very few men would want to date a woman who had one uncontrollable child. But to have 11 that were suddenly your responsibility, and you're supposed to come home to chaos, confusion, and people doing drugs, falling out of windows, injuring themselves in inexplicable ways, and suddenly this is all on your plate for Ethel? I think Ethel would have had to have been a pretty unbelievable beauty / amazing personality / crazy good friend before any man could ever have given up his whole life for her and her brood of kids. You want to talk about Mother Hubbard? I just can't even imagine. And then for her to send out that silly poster that sort of reminds everybody, hey, you get with me, you get the crazy too. I mean, way to scare off anybody who might have for a second considered it. I think I should be very clear when I say I think kids are a real gift from God, and I don't think that having a lot of kids should be a blight against anybody. I'm not saying, oh, kids. I have kids. I love my kids, But we are lying to ourselves if we tell ourselves that kids are always great. No, kids who have been well brought up are great. Kids who have been left to their own devices are a nightmare, and don't even lie to yourself. You don't want to be around that. Nobody wants to be around that. Just like I don't want to be around an adult who is immature, out of control, and, the literal worst because they have no personal discipline. The same goes for kids. So imagine having 11 of those. I mean, she was really up the creek without a paddle when it came to finding a man. But again, I don't even really think she wanted to. I think men were a distraction, but not something that she was actually looking to invest her time, love, energy, and money into. All right, thank you guys so much for hanging out, and I will see you again shortly, and we'll keep going with the other Mrs. Kennedy. On Fridays, I think I'm going to do a sort of news roundup video, stories that caught my eye during the week, but we'll get to it when we get to it. All right, thank you guys so much. I'll see you later. Bye.